Okay, so with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panel. First, Shona Quinn. She is the head of sustainability for Eileen Fisher. So welcome, Shona.
Thank you.
We also have Phil Rawls. He's a chef, an entrepreneur, an artist, and the founder of MycoWorks. So welcome, Phil. And Louis Perkins. He is with the Apparel Impact Institute. Thank you so much for being here, Louis. So we're going to be talking about an issue that is very important for all of us, because even if we are not into fashion, we have to be into fashion. We all have a closet. We all have a place where we put our clothes. We all have different tastes. We all like different textiles and colors and styles. So this is something that really have to do with every single one of us. The fashion industry also is very damaging for the environment. And I would like to just to set up the table to give you some stats. It accounts for almost 10% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that are warming our planets. It pollutes the rivers, it dries up our water sources, and 85% of all textiles end up in the garbage every year. So I think that is an amazing stat. We have a great challenge ahead, but the good news is that the solutions are on the table, and there are many people that are actually implementing these solutions, and it's truly a great honor to be talking to three people that are actually a great success case studies here, because they are living and doing fashion in a sustainable way. So let's start with the conversation. I would like to start with you, Luis. You launched a $250 million donor climate fashion fund to get funds to the companies that actually want to be sustainable in fashion. So yesterday we were talking on a call, and you were explaining us exactly why this is so important.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Good. I'm glad this is working. Yeah, as I look at our title, Green is the New Black, I'm thinking about green is the new black, and Tom Steyer's comment the other night about capitalism scales. And I think where I'm excited about the work that we're doing with the industry is that we've known that once the capital markets kind of wake up to the opportunity for investment in this, that things would begin to scale. Like, oh, we can make money off this. This isn't a sustainability tax on top of our apparel or any product that we're making. This is actually a way to transition, economies and transition into advanced materials. As, we're going to talk about in just the future state of clean energy around the globe. So our approach, which we're really excited about, is to bring companies together who traditionally wouldn't do a ton of investment directly into their supply chain because they don't own these suppliers. Now, you could see some preferred relationships where there might be an opportunity to install solar or participate as a co-share, maybe do a long-term patient capital loan towards that facility's acceleration. But a lot of brand retailers don't have that kind of capital, or they're just not incentivized to do it across the entire supply chain. They might do it for one or two, and it makes a good press release. It's a good story, and it's great that it happens, but it's not really scalable and making the big impact. And so what we recognized was, with a shared supply chain and companies that are trying to solve for clean energy, renewable thermal heat technologies, the adoption of new preferred materials or existing better materials in these facilities, that the beneficiary is really the factory. This is small, medium enterprise, mom and pop in many cases, suppliers who are, really pressed on the finance for not only the production of the product they're trying to make for the company, it's a really thin margin for them, but also then being asked to take on these big capital expenditure improvements to meet these climate goals, and are we incentivized? And so we just thought, let's do it as a collaborative and create a pooled fund where we can go in with a group of consortium of brand retailers in those regions, and then start to collaboratively underwrite or subsidize the cost of piloting, testing, implementing program-related work that doesn't have a return on investment, But as I announced last night, we would be attracting even more blended capital and other asset classes from debt and equity and subsidy from development banks, traditional commercial lenders, venture capital towards accelerating that work. And so we get to be sort of the first in catalytic capital, and then we crowd in other partners towards this $2 billion unlock that we talked about last night.
That is wonderful news, and actually, I know you're going to tell us how companies can actually apply to these funds. I think it's something that is very important that you mentioned is that all businesses are realizing that it is a good investment to be sustainable, that it makes sense economically. No, so this is across the board, not only in the fashion industry. Shona, you are the perfect example of how sustainable fashion really works and really can be really successful economically and basically in all aspects. Could you tell us a bit why this was important for your brand, for Eileen Fisher, to be sustainable from the beginning?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. And I would say it's still very much a work in progress for us. And you mentioned earlier that it's a systems issue, and it is for us as a business. When we think about our system, we think about our system as how do you create the framework of a business? What type of decisions are you making? What's the ownership look like? And so just that framework is one piece of it. The product, of course, has our largest social and environmental impact. So the whole life cycle of the product, where is it coming from and where is it going? So we think about that pretty deeply. And the third one is really around the culture of the company and how people are coming into the space on this. How are they thinking about making these day-to-day decisions that matter around social and environmental issues? And the last one is really collaboration, in connection to what Louis was just talking about. We can't do this alone, so we're always reaching out to find partners in support of the work. So and I'm sure that we can go down any of those areas, yes, but yes. That's well,
I would like us to tell us a bit. What is the life cycle of the clothing that you produce? Because I think is just fascinating. Basically the strategy that you have created.
Right. Yeah. Well, Eileen is actually a real person and still is very much a part of the company. And she was inspired by Japanese and the kimono and how timeless that was. And it was around for 1,000 years before they decided to maybe become a little bit more modernized. But she loved that idea of the kimono. And so the idea first off is the design and how you think about it in a very timeless, simple way. And that idea that you can buy less but wear it in more ways. And then you get to the life cycle piece of where it's coming from. So that starts at the raw material level. How are you sourcing those raw materials? The industrial processes of, the knitting, the weaving, the sewing, the dyeing, the cutting, and all of the resources that can get lost in that aspect, of the farmers growing, and then you lose a lot of it as you go through the processes. But then the use phase and how the customer is caring for that product and how long is she keeping it for? Is it something that she's investing in or that she would wear for a long time or not? And that has a footprint of its own. And then end of life or next life. And for us, we talk about first, second, and third life. First life being the biggest, new materials, new products. Second life is the idea of how the resale market and how might that become a new type of business model, that by expanding the life cycle of a product, you can actually make revenue that way, and maybe that would take over some of the revenue you're making from first life product. And then third life is, well, if it's too damaged or too used, how can we make it into something different? And we call one of those initiatives Waste No More, where we're felting it and making bags. But it can also go into some kind of fiber-to-fiber program. So that's kind of the life cycle.
I love it. Thank you so much, Shona. And talking about fibers, Phil, your company is producing textiles out of mushrooms. And I know that you have been fascinated with mushrooms and the possibilities that have opened up for us for the past couple of decades. So how did you find that this material, that mushrooms could be the raw material for fashion?
Thank you for the questions, and thank you for having me here. It's more like fashion found us, and we were responding to what fashion wanted. Initially, it was because of supply chain issues. It really was not because of ethical or environmental concerns outright, but before Corona, about 5 years ago, the supply chains were starting to hit the various luxury companies and anybody who was using animal leather, and they couldn't have the materials that they wanted of the quality in the time that it had to be delivered. And so it was much more in response to that. And so we received a lot of incoming calls, and we're like, can you make something like leather? And then we're like, we figured it out, and then we're like, yes, we can make something like leather. And so that was, it was more in response to demand, more than we had some big idea that we felt we had to push out into the world.
And what have been the response of the people? Because I was looking at the pictures of your products, and it's unbelievable. It really definitely looks like leather, and it's just you brought
We say
sample.
feeling is believing, and so like when you actually touch the material, you can't believe everything you see on the internet. So I think like our thing falls into that category of like, I can't believe it's real, and then it's when people touch it and they realize like it could be like leather, or it seems to give a lot of the aesthetics and the same feelings as leather, and satisfies. It was alive. It has a history. It was. No. No offense. It's like get your grimy hands off that thing.
Okay. Why is less impactful? I mean, could you explain to us why it's less impactful to get a material that looks like leather but is not, doesn't come from the cows?
I'll tout that we just completed an LCA, life cycle analysis, that we've been conducting almost over 2 years from our pilot facility, to look at how much energy it requires, how much water, how much materials, the labor, all of these kind of things. And we clock in at under 10%, about 8% of comparable to plastics, the same material that might be made out of plastics or that might be made out of animal leather. Because we have a very controlled system. We're not, the way that the cattle industry or the leather industry, it's more of like a filtering system of when the quality leather will get to the position where it needs to be finished at the tannery. And so that's where you'll often hear about maybe, a piece of textile or something has to go around the planet multiple times. But we can generate our materials right at the point of manufacture, often from a waste product, an agricultural waste product that might exist in that location, and transform that into this material at the place of where the manufacturing happens. So it's partially that, but I just also want to reflect of, a bit of what Louis and Shona were saying. It has to do, mycology, the study of mushrooms, is often a very local sort of practice. You get to know the things that are around you, the trees, the organisms, these things that do this. And so we really grow out of that, is like we know the organism, we know what it has to eat, and then we know what it has to do in order to live, the environment it has to be in. And so our industry is a little bit reflective of that, is like we are hyper aware of the locality of where we're doing something. And we're setting up this large facility in South Carolina right now in Union County, and we're using the agricultural waste from the wood mills. We're using, like local energy from solar and from hydro, and local labor. It's manufactured in the U.S. in this place, and then it's going to be, post-processed there. Ultimately, right now, it's going to markets in Europe in the luxury, the various luxury houses. So that's, probably one of the larger chunks of energy, is just getting it over to Europe at this point.
So I was reading you did a collaboration with Hermes, right?
Yeah, Hermes was our first customer.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's wonderful that the luxury brands are also interested in this. Of course, I mean, this aside that the cows and the cattle industry is responsible for a great deal of the emissions that are warming our planet, and wastewater, and are driver for deforestation in the Amazon jungle. So So this is wonderful news. Thank you so much, Phil. Luis, I wanted to ask you if did it surprise you when you saw that actually the banks were open to creating this fund, that there were so many people interested in the finance center? Because if you think about it, a couple of years ago, this was not a conversation that we will have. And today, I mean, you're telling us such a great success and so many opportunities that you're creating with your platform. Were you surprised when this happened?
I'm not surprised about the financial institutions. I think what the challenge, in a good way, has been for the brand retailers to figure out where their commitments could come from, because their budgets for supply chain improvements haven't traditionally been large enough to take on. The commitment that we're asking is $10 million over this next 7 years to 2030, and then getting 25 partners and that at that level is going to yield the 250 to build up and spend down. And I think it's just working with these companies, their corporate treasury, their CFOs, to start thinking about, this could be a collaboration between our philanthropy, between our corporate treasury. There may be some funds available in other parts of the company. And then also, as we start to look at who owns the shares of a lot of these companies too, so it's the families, the family offices and their investments, as well as looking at potentially some of the large institutions that have asset management own, large percentages of these fashion brands like BlackRock and Vanguard and T. Rowe Price. I mean, that's the owners of this. And then those of us who are shareholders. So starting to look at those ecosystems. For the banks, they've been anxious and ready to be able to deploy capital into this work. But what they would tell you is the solutions that are coming to them are not de-risked. They're too risky. They don't have enough information about whether or not this is a strong bet to place or not. And banks typically aren't as risky as the venture capital. And so part of our 2 billion strategy is you're teeing up a different asset class across a different stage of development so that you're ready for commercial lending once you've gotten through the grant making, the philanthropic, the venture, the angel, and you're sort of teeing this up. And then this is getting a little bit complex, but you can also stack these assets so that I can use philanthropy in loans to help lower the interest rates and all that. So the banks are excited about this work. I mean, one of the banks we work with is HSBC. They've made $1 trillion commitment to deploy sustainable finance towards this climate work, and they're looking for projects. So now we enter and say, hey, we've got 45 plus brand retailers in a shared supply chain, identifying suppliers that they want to source from over a longer period of time. It gets it as close to long-term commitments and offtake agreements as one could get. And that's probably the next step for this. And once those kinds of longer-term agreements to stabilizing the suppliers we're working with and then making those joint investments happen, things are going to flow a lot faster. And so like I said, the banks are excited that we're doing this because we're also applying this data-driven, science-based approach, which they need for their ESG reporting. So they're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to quantify that this is actually a CO2 emission reduction thing? And so someone comes in who's done LCA work, and then we can also verify and validate that with them. And so like, hey, this is verified CO2 emissions. It can quantify for our science-based targets commitments. It can qualify for our ESG tracking. So all this starts to make sense towards some of these larger goals and commitments they're trying to make.
Anybody could apply to these grants because it's a grant process, right?
Yeah, so our $250 million, we opened up the grant making process February 1st. I think the press release went out on January 31st, and we've done a series of webinars. We'll do some more. You can go to our website or see me after, and I'll give you information on it. But we're specifically funding ventures, programs, projects, and solutions within that go into facilities to lower carbon, and it's across these areas. Technologies or projects that would lower carbon through material efficiency, through energy efficiency, through preferred material sourcing, through next generation materials, through as I said, energy efficiency, scaling renewable electricity, and then the big one, which is thermal heat processing, which we estimate to be over 50% of the CO2 emissions, is the dyeing and finishing and heat applied to fabric production and leather production and shoe production. And that currently takes on-site boilers with coal and or natural gas, or maybe biomass is a little better. We're trying to disrupt that in a way that we can get coal out of the supply chain from the on-site perspective, not just the renewable electricity equation. So we're really anxiously seeking out ventures and solutions around dry processing, waterless dyeing, and renewable thermal heat practices. So yes, anybody can apply, but those are the funding categories we're looking for. And then we have a set of criteria, and you fill out the application, and you can see if you qualify, and then we pull you into the system from there. And we'll be announcing the first tranche of grants in June. I just was with our advisory council in New York last week. That's technical experts that are working on reviewing the first applications. And then we'll do a second wave the second half of the year. So we hope to do 2 funding rounds every year.
That's so important. I mean, finance is really, really at the heart of any transition. I mean, when we're talking about these big changes that needed to take place. Shona, your company is completely the opposite from fast fashion. And I would like us to tell us a little bit, what are the values that you follow? Because I see, for example, that the materials are like great quality, that people just love. If they buy a dress from Eileen Fisher, they love it, or a jacket, and they want to keep it for 20 years. They just don't want to just turn around and go and buy a new, bless you, a new jacket, no? So could you tell us how did that strategy came about, and why it was important?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with just the business and the business framework, and how Eileen was thinking about it when she created her company. That idea of following a different standard, not kind of a regular business, but something more holistic, holding the whole system. That idea of balance. It's really not just about maximizing profit. It's not even just about minimizing risk. It's more about how do you hold the well-being of a business and hold the societal and planetary well-being in parallel to that. And not easy, but we try every day. And even instead of just shareholders, it's about the stakeholders and the supply chain and our customers and the communities that we work in. And we're also 40% employee owned, and we're privately held, so our timelines can get longer. We have time to think about things, discuss things. We're not like we've got to hit quarterly profit results or something. We're also B Corp certified, and we're a benefit corporation, so that's really kind of holding us to the responsibility of making sure social and environmental issues are embedded in our work. But I would say beyond just the business structure, the bigger piece for us is the culture of a company. And there's a man, Jamie Bristow, that I'm following right now, but he talks about the climate crisis is a relationship crisis. The climate crisis is a relationship crisis. So it's not about, well, of course, the work of innovation and technology is important. It's going to help us, but it's us. You know, it's who we are, and how should we be in an organization? So, you know, we've been taught through some of us who've gone for an MBA, you know, what it is to wear your business hat. And you know how to wear a business hat, and you know what it means to get return on investment. But then you maybe go home and you put on your parent hat. And then maybe you want to put on your civic action hat. And what we try to do, or what we try to practice, is coming to work with your whole self. You know, that you're thinking about all of these things, and that you are open to dialogue with folks that may not be completely agreeing with you on how you might see business, or how you might see how you do a certain strategy. So there's this piece of, we say we're connected because we've got our cell phones. We're very connected, right? But actually, we're pretty disconnected and we're pretty out of balance. And I think that idea of how do we cultivate the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with others, and not just others who are in our little community, but with the big O, others, and the natural world. It's not just resource, it's a place that gives us oxygen to breathe every day, water to drink. Water is life. So I think it's something we forget in our industry, and we try to bring that to work. And it's a much slower process to think that way, to have conversations that way. But it's really powerful to have an aligned organization when you get there. We're not totally it's not like perfect at Eileen Fisher either, we practice this every day. But that cultural piece feels like a really important pathway to emissions reductions in a business that we don't really talk about too much.
That's so beautifully said. Thank you so much, because I definitely think that is the case. I mean, we have somehow disconnected from us and are very much looking outside. And once we reconnect, we really can understand that we are just part of nature and that everything that happens outside is going to affect us. But the changes start right here, with the connection that we have inside. I love the ideology of the company. I think it's wonderful. We should all go that way. But how can you take that idea and that feeling and that initiative to the rest of the people? I mean, when you are competing with an industry that is looking for the next dress, the next jacket, the next color, the next textile.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say when you're talking to sustainability folks in the different companies, we see it as pre-competitive in a sense, like we all need nature to survive. So how do we figure this out? And it's some of those issues. And Louis can speak to how it's happening in the industrial processes. But when you're so far up the supply chain at a farm trying to figure out regenerative ag, it's okay to partner with folks on that, to help in support of training or whatever is needed. So I think we tend to be more collaborative than is led to believe. And there's ways, too, that you can still take a material and you knit it the way you want to knit it, or you put it in the color that you think is going to be the most important color for next season, So there's still things that we can do to still be our own brands.
Wonderful. When we're talking about the raw material field, what you're doing, it's amazing, and I know that you're very connected with nature and the importance of all the resources that nature can provide to us. Could this be scalable to the point of the industry?
Yes, absolutely. But the scale of industry is enormous. Talking about billions, I think we have to actually talk about trillions, because this is what we really need to do, and it's a much larger commitment and a time frame than I think we're kind of even sort of recognizing that this is going to be going on for decades into the future of reorganizing how we manufacture stuff and to bring down the amount of energy, resources, and just even the culture of how we think about materiality. We're building a 250,000 square foot facility right now, and that will supply several million square feet of our material every year. But I think that the amount of animal skins that are used each year are on the measure of billions, and maybe even in the tens of billions. So, and then the petroleum, the vegan, plastic-based leathers are, I think, 3 or 4 times larger than that of the square footage. So, even if we are to start producing a new factory of this scale, a mega factory every year, it will take us a century of building a factory every year to be able to supply to that scale. And so, I mean, a fantastic opportunity for all the capitalists to think of this, you know, the addressable market is gigantic, but it's also like, yeah, the capital must flow. And it's, you know, Blackstone is one of our primary investors in this last round, and they didn't even have the structure, you know, in place to invest in ESG until just about a year ago. So it's like they want to invest in these things, but it goes to structural finance in terms of how to scale because of the amount of money that it's going to take to actually do that.
So Luis, you're definitely key in this
Yeah,
process.
Very
and I
important.
want to validate, we put out a report last year called Unlocking the $1 Trillion Opportunity to Decarbonize Fashion, which you can download on our website. But when you start to look at externalities related to it, it is much more than $1 trillion, of course, particularly when you start talking about the capacity building and the number of facilities, which we were talking about before the panel. Like, you know, this one facility, there needs to be, you know, hundreds of facilities across the planet, if not thousands, that are producing at this level to compete with existing, not only, as we talk about leather, but also, you know, potentially recycled cotton, or there's a great technology called Evernew that's separating blended fabrics from polycotton blends, and that's, you know, an initial round of $100 million for a facility in South Carolina that team is building, and you know, it'll go from there. And so that's another way in which we're looking at what is the role that the brand retailers may want to play. Certain companies like H&M Group, who we work with, and say what you will about fast fashion and volume, they're also, you know, have issued a green bond that has one of the largest investments in this kind of work. And Inditex is doing the same thing, the parent company of Zara and that house of brands. They're putting big dollars into capacity building, but can they do it fast enough? And also, our perspective is one brand shouldn't sort of dominate that. It should really be a diversified, you know, approach too. So we're starting to collaborate in that expansion of capacity building, bringing everybody into this pre-competitive collaboration, collective action approach.
Wonderful. One of the big challenges that we have today are microplastics that are just polluting our oceans, getting into our food system, getting into our bodies, getting everywhere, basically. So for you, Phil, your raw material is mushrooms. Was this something that you thought about when you created the company?
No. We founded MycoWorks about 10 years ago, so I don't think we can qualify as a startup anymore. I don't know, we're a young company. And initially, we were really interested in making things for the built environment, for architecture, because that was the largest carbon sink and just seemed like where, you know, like, okay, well, if you can grow building materials, then that seems to satisfy a lot of the issues that were out there, but it's still too early for those kind of markets. And it really was not, there was no ethical drive at all in doing these things, but it was way more from a dorky materialist standpoint of like, can you? And it's sort of like this, I think we can do it, you know, like it seems achievable. Of like, can we put a man on the moon? Yeah, yes, the engineers can work hard enough and we could achieve this kind of thing. And it was more like, yes, we can make building materials that can, you know, take the place of a lot of plastic things that are go into a building and all that kind of stuff. And we did that for 5 years, and we kept on hitting, you know, that there was a ton of interest but no demand. And again, it's like the drive for our materials is not because of any ethical, you know, primary concerns. That is what we call a backwind, whether it's vegan or it doesn't use plastic. But it's more like, can we make something that's equivalent to plastic or animal skin that's neither of those materials? And just from a material standpoint, that to me is really interesting. And that's what's kind of driven our scientists and engineers. A lot of people who have come to work with us have those ethical or moralistic concerns as to what the things are going to do, or animal welfare, but for us, I mean, it's much more about the human welfare and the culture that we're producing, because it's human beings who are producing this, and they have families and they have lives, and so we're kind of like, that's, you know, we're people oriented in terms of how we have to produce this, and that for us is like our microcosm. You know, we can't make a barrier of like, if you eat this or if you believe that, you can't work for us, because we had some of those barriers imposed upon us as to receiving funding. Like there were vegan funds or other folks who we had to measure their criteria of behaviors, and we just never could. And so it was like, we felt that we couldn't hold this criteria to everyone else as well. And you know, there's this saying, the enemy of, what is it? The perfect is the enemy of the good. And so, you know, you might say like these values are baked in to us because we're like, I mean, the initial thing for creating those materials, I wanted to make an art material that I could work with, that I could throw away at the end of making art with it, and it wasn't just going to become garbage. I could put it into the compost bin. And so it was more of just like a driver of not wanting to work with harsh chemicals in my art practice, not wanting to have all this junk left over that was once precious art that is now worthless garbage. And so that's just extended, you know, to our company, and like having to work with a tight group of people that you have to meet with every day and try to achieve something where you don't know the answer to it. And that's like, that can create a lot of pressures and discomforts and things like that. And so it's more of just working that stuff out. And then we can go forward. And again, I feel like we can, you know, that this uses, I think, like less than 1% plastic on its final finishing. And we're really proud of that, but that was just never, that was not the driver for us. So we're happy at where we've landed and what we've accomplished, but it's, I don't know how, you know, and it's really difficult to avoid plastics, even that 1%. Yeah. Like, we're looking for something to replace that 1% that can create a product that would have the longevity and the functionality that people demand. Otherwise, they won't buy the product. And so we're, again, like, this is like, we can't make something good enough for the market without using plastic to perform in the way that people expect plastic to perform now. And so that's, again, like a gigantic material wall, because plastic is plastic. It can do whatever you want it to do and configure to that. And that's miraculous, like a testament to modern chemistry and human ingenuity. But like, to get the organic world to do whatever you want, like, this has been humans' challenge for all of time, is like, how do you do this in some way to get the living world to, you know, accompany us in what our desires are? And like, they're not, our desires are not always tied to what's good. So it's sort of like having to figure out that relationship.
I can add, just from a brand perspective, you know, we are mostly a natural fibers based company. We're like 80% plant-based, 13% animal fiber, 7% synthetic, and of that synthetics, it's really about Lycra and bringing the comfort into the natural fiber. So that blend is across a lot of our natural fibers. So it's almost like a contamination piece for end of life when we're trying to recycle or change it into a new fiber. And that piece of R&D for Lycra is something that our designers are still, you know, running up against and challenged by. You can get a recycled Lycra now, or a recycled nylon, or a recycled poly, but still the microplastic issue of it coming off and ending up in the waterways is still happening.
And keep in mind, when you do have that 1%, as you said, that's a really important distinction. Is, you know, it will contaminate the recyclability of the 99% of the rest of it, but also these technologies that are looking at separating those blends, because you can recycle them as sort of mono streams, but you have to have technologies that can separate out those things again on the back end. And there's a tremendous amount of investment that's going to be necessary for the sorting and collecting and applying the chemical and mechanical processes to do that, and then the facilities that will do that as well too. So it's an exciting opportunity, but this is one of the big challenges that we have. As I mentioned, the thermal heat challenge. There's also separating blended fabrics in order to get them upcycled.
Great. Before we open up for questions, because we have 20 minutes for you to ask questions to them, I wanted to see and get a feel of how you feel. Like, for example, if you see that bag that you brought, Phil, and you know that it's made out of mushrooms, and then you have a leather bag on the other side. For me personally, I think that people, I mean, it's beautiful, it's soft, it's durable. If I think that it comes from a vegetable, I feel that it's absolutely a plus. It's the same with a hamburger. I mean, if you know that it's a delicious hamburger that is vegetable, it's come from vegetable, from plant-based, and at the next to it you have a hamburger that is made of cattle. I mean, I think people people go for the taste that is delicious, that is healthy, that is good for the body. Not so much that is made from a cow, or that the leather is made from a cattle. Is that how you feel? Or do you think that the people will feel that way?
I think we all imagine a future in which we live in, but they're all probably very different, those futures that we're all imagining right now. But everybody does this. They project themselves into the future. And when we brought our materials to New York Fashion Week or to places where there's just these hardened, crusty, industrial people who are in the industry and they've kind of seen it all and heard it all and all this kind of thing. And, they'll come in and they want to disbelieve this or think, like, this just can't exist. And we can see it when they touch the material that they're like, there's a future. There's some future that I'm going to live in. And I don't exactly know what that one is for that particular individual, but it's like they're starting to imagine themselves without animals or without the stuff while still having the things that they really love, the luxury products that make them feel good. Again, it's like it's right up against your skin, or you're wearing it with your beautiful outfit to some special event or something like that. And it's there. It's still like, it feels good. It's functioning the way you want it to. It might last several generations. You can give it to your children. Again, it's like you can have the secondary value or the tertiary value, all those kind of things like that. And so I think, again, it's like it fulfills something of our ideas of perpetuity. I mean, that's a lot of what luxury is that there is still a world ahead of us that is sort of like the one that we're familiar with or has given us pleasures in the past, and there's still more to come. And so I think that this satisfies that. It's like, it's not a matter of like, if it's made out of a cow or a mushroom, but it's sort of like, all the things that the incidental information that you're hearing about the environment, or just, every day you're getting a lot of these messages, and it's like, how do we get out of here? And this just seems to provide an sort of like an open door, and people are just so happy about that. And again, it's like, I can't imagine what every person's future is going to be like, but they are putting themselves into the future.
Yeah, I can add to that. It's great, Phil. The idea of everyone has their own pathway that they want to take into the future, and for Eileen Fisher, we do use animal products right now. That may change in the future, and it's okay to have a veggie burger and then maybe have a hamburger if you like both. But are those both being produced in a sustainable, regenerative way? And I think a piece of it is we all have to cultivate the strength to stay focused on the climate crisis and build the resilience and practice making those conscious choices daily, and what does that mean for a business when we're offering a leather bag and not a mushroom-based bag, and as a conscious company, how could we be doing things better? How can we be making sure that we're leaning into all those various new opportunities that are coming to us, and not closing to how much we love leather or the burger, but staying open to it.
And I'll just add to that. I think we talk a lot about sort of the consumer in all this, in terms of where's the consumer, and is the younger consumer going to shift and change all of this? And I think what both of these other panelists have talked about really is our attachment to what we think is kind of cool or desirable or we want, and that can change. It doesn't have to be what we think it is today, right? And in fact, history shows us it often does. Last night I led in with saying, art, fashion is art. It's like theater, it's like music, it's like the stage, it's a way we communicate, it's a way we express, we tell stories. It's a reflection of the times in which it's being produced. If you look up the course of history, like there's actual significant markers that indicate how fashion shifts according to what's actually happening geopolitically or socially. Pandemics have completely changed. And so I think about that a lot in terms of how do we now just start to shift the conversation to this is the desirable thing that I want. Today I'm wearing these Lululemon pants that I've had restitched. If you look at them carefully, you'll see all over. And you know, I wore the heck out of these things during the pandemic because I like didn't go anywhere, and I just like wanted my cozy, comfortable pants that I could hang around in and all that. And I love them, and I keep repairing them. I have this beautiful Etro suit that has moth holes in it that I'm now having some design work done on stitching on the side, and I'm going to wear that as proudly with that flaw. You know, it's like I can't remember the Japanese. Thank you. Yes, with the gold that replaced. This is the kind of like, these are the desirable directions I think that we want to think about as that we want to desire things that have a story. And right now that story might be, I passed it at Louis Vuitton and I bought it for, 10 grand. That's the story. That's the end of the story. But maybe it's like, no, I want to know about the materials. I want to know who made it. I want to open it up and see that person's name in there. I want to QR code it and get the farm where those materials came from. I want to know about this guy that was the innovator, And I want to learn about Eileen's story about how she was influenced by the Japanese kimono. I mean, that's what's cool about fashion. And I think the more we can start build those stories towards achieving these goals of sustainability and social good, environmental good, I think that's going to be exciting.
Well, wonderful. I mean, what a great conversation. I really appreciate you all for the wonderful work that you are doing changing this industry. We're going to have some time for questions. So, okay.
Hello. My name is Ramsha. I'm a graduate student at Tufts University. So my question is, do you think that production regions will change as man-made fibers are deployed? Because one of the reasons why Asia dominates in production of apparel is because they have the weather, they have the cotton production, they have cheap labor available. So what do you think is going to happen if these technologies are patentable? How will you balance equity with R&D? And then how will you look at the supply chains? Will they change? Will they shift to other regions that have higher skilled labor? So appreciate that.
Yeah. That's a lot of questions. So, I mean, we're setting up our plant in South Carolina, so we're going to use local fibers. That's part of it, local water, local labor, all these kind of things. And then probably in about a year, we have to do the same thing somewhere else on the planet and produce the exact same thing. And that will be a really hard challenge to figure out how to do that, just from even a technical, scientific, labor, all the inputs that you have going into that. So we don't yet know. But we're anticipating that. Shona and I talked a little bit about this. Of the big elephant in the room is we're setting up for manufacturing in the U.S. There's a ton of other companies that are also setting up in the South. The Sun Belt region of the United States, and so there's this gigantic drive. And I think we saw it last night in the presentation of how many billions of dollars are being invested in this particular region that historically produced textiles in the United States. We are looking overseas. We have to show that this model works elsewhere. And so again, that's the next thing that we have to prove out on this very long journey of proving things is to do that. And we just don't know. But I think we're going to come up against organized labor issues in about 5 years in the United States that have just never been reconciled here historically. And we're going to have a strong manufacturing base here in the U.S. And so this is just forward-looking, we're going to encounter union issues or unionization or just all the other kind of things that have happened with that. So, I mean, it's as much, yes, it's the materiality, but then again, it's yes, it's the people who are going to produce this, and how are we going to have 1,000 manufacturing? Does everybody want to work in a manufacturing facility? I don't know, if that's the growth area for jobs. Certainly there will be ones in the material development and textiles and all this kind of stuff like that. I would just like to take a little side course on this of something that I've learned about the textile industry is that it's historically a lack of standardization that has led to the rise of oil-based, petroleum-based things because they could standardize their chemistries, beginning many decades back. And the textile industries, which all came about when nations were first forming back, 150 years ago, and there's incredible protectionism of even the terminologies or the machines that I always thought it was warp, weave, and weft. But actually, globally, there are, I think, more than 25 determinations for warp, weave, and weft, so there isn't even a common language. The standards for how you have to make textiles we get muslin as one of our inputs, as, simple cotton fabric. And we were like, okay, well, muslin is muslin, but actually muslin is not muslin. Muslin is completely different if you buy it from a different company in terms of how it was made, the structure of the fibers, how they're woven together, the talcs or other things that are added into that. And so, yeah, we learned this when we were doing our life cycle analysis, whereas like we couldn't find some standard for muslin. We had to create a standard for a very particular kind of muslin. And so it was like of people not working together, not making standards, protectionisms, nationalisms, 150 years back that we're still reconciling with, because the petroleum industry is like, we're based on chemicals. Every molecule is exactly the same. So we can make polyester, and we know it's going to be the same in this country, in that country, and that country. And it was one of the first shifts of globalization was making these plastic materials, which were the same everywhere. So every manufacturer didn't have to change their machines to deal with it. So, I mean, it's like we've uncovered, legacy issues that were just, like, can we get down with warp, weave, and weft? No. In India, there's actually even, I think, 4 different terminologies for warp, weave, and weft. So it's like even within one country, there is not even a standard measure of what that thing could be. So it goes very deep. And I'm sure, the other panelists here can speak a bit to this.
I know we have other questions too, but I just quickly to address a question that policy and finance is going to shift a lot of this as well too. And countries that aren't embracing just energy transition and making it a clean energy more available and are still continuing to invest in coal burning, that's going to be less attractive for production. There's geopolitical impacts, and there, obviously with natural gas and some of the things that we're dealing with. So all this is going to shift the supply chain to some degree. And then I do think the future is going to be around localizing a lot of the production. I mean, currently you may buy a jacket that says it's made in Vietnam, but the materials may have come from Bangladesh and India, and the mill may have been in another country. And so we're moving stuff around. Eileen Fisher did a really good, I remember there was a really cool chart that you all did one time that sort of showed the flow of materials across the planet. And so I think that all that is subject for shifting and changing, and the advancement of new materials that are coming from regenerative byproduct of agriculture like yours, and also, man-made cellulosics coming from pineapple and orange and all that are going to be located to the regions where that is being produced as well too. And then the finance piece is important too, as countries are making big commitments to, this kind of investment in their countries and at COP meetings and Davos meetings and all that, then it's going to flow as well.
Thank you, Luis. Another question?
Question on your $250 million fund. How much has been raised to date, and how much more do you have to raise?
Yeah. So it's to be raised and deployed over the 7. So a lot of times when you're raising a fund, you want to like raise it quickly and then close it and start to deploy use of funds. We already started deploying use of funds from day 1, and so we have $60 million in from the 6 lead partners, and then we're bringing in more. If we bring in like 6 partners a year, we'll sort of reach our goal. And then actually we'll hit it sooner than that. So our thought is just to continue to be like a rolling and revolving type fund. And then what was the second part? How much have we raised already? And then it's all to be spent down by 2032. So you raise it up and you spend it down. So our first tranche of grant making, I think, is the first $4 million we'll put out this spring to test out, and our grant sizes are 50 to 250 right now. As the fund gets larger, we'll have $30 million in grant making a year. That's the cap that we intend. So when we get to that point, the grant sizes could get larger, particularly for ones that we're working with across multiple years. And we use 2030 as the deadline, but clearly we're going to keep going, and because 2050 is our decarbonization goal, and probably should hit it by 2040 if we're really smart.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I have a sore throat because I've been talking for 6 days. I'm part of the Future Leaders cohort, and thank you for the panel. Thank you for being here. I'm curious, building off of our first question, how are you looking to incorporate like lower level jobs, particularly within the US, the apprenticeship program? Do you feel like you could use this to invest in smaller businesses who are trying to transition to more sustainable materials and practices? Or is that something that like hasn't really come up yet, because the apprenticeship program in the past has been plumbing, electrician, and more like classic apprenticeship based?
Who would like to answer?
That's a good question. You know, I would say that we take younger designers kind of under our wing just by bringing them into our facilities, particularly with our Next Life, Waste No More, Felt Team program, understanding how we do that second, third life piece. You know, we get calls on a regular basis of, you know, can we come and see your tiny factory and how you do this? And we just try to have an open door policy and allow folks to come in. We've given school tours, we've given big brands tours, you know, and everybody in between. So we don't have a specific program in place, but we are always trying to support those that are interested in this work.
Wait a minute, please.
Hi, thank you for the insights that you have shared so far. I'm Kaushik, a grad student from American University. So currently the fast fashion culture that we have, right, it's booming because it's easier to buy, it's cheaper to buy. That means you save a lot and you have the ability to buy more. With sustainability products, the price range is one aspect which demotivates consumers to making that purchase. What advice would you give to those early young age startups which for whom it's important to make return on investment for them to be sustainable on their own so that they can innovate, they can bring in new products and reach out to customers? So how would you tackle that product positioning for those kind of organizations if they are not able to compete at price point? What are the other aspects they should be looking at?
I can jump in first. I think what's kind of cool about some of these companies that are in this fast fashion category is how much they have actually invested in organic cotton and recycled poly, and you can buy sustainable products at those places and just hold on to them. You know, I find that a lot of them are actually better made than we think. So for a young person that's trying to get into sustainability, I think there are a lot of options. Target Corporation puts out some great products that my kids wear, all Target stuff, and it's really well made, and plus they're outgrowing it really fast. But there's recycled poly, there's organic cotton in there, so that's a start. And then I also think it is about like buying things longer too, and like getting out of this rapid cycle thing. So yeah, maybe it is a $20 t-shirt, not a $9 t-shirt, but you're going to hold on to it for longer. And I think it's just intuitive. But I'd love to hear from the others on this.
I would say, like, from a consumer-based side, it's the resale market and how much that's growing now, and how you can think about the next life piece, if apparel or consumer products that can be recycled and reused, how possible is that? So for us right now, that idea of how do we extend the use phase and find the revenues connected to that. So you're bringing in a customer that wants to stay with you, that wants to give you his or her clothes back, and so you're building that brand and engagement, and also widening that net because the reuse or resell program is at a less expensive price. So people that maybe don't have as much money to invest in a $200 pair of pants, they can get it for half or even less than that price through resale. And I think, $100 or even $50 for folks that are ready to buy something that they're investing in for the long term is okay. And so I don't know, I go to resale because even for fashion, if you only want it because you really want this fun summer piece, you can get resale and you don't feel like you don't feel so guilty about it.
And most of these companies are adding this onto their online portals now. I mean, it's kind of amazing how much this is showing up now. And there's partnerships with like Renewal Workshop and others that are the back engine that are doing this, or Recurate, that are these companies, these startups that are really helping these companies build out these platforms.
I mean, I think, putting my business hat on, I just, newly issued, we followed this maxim of business, which is like, respond to the pain. And so industry is almost always feeling some kind of pain from regulatory pressures or supply chain or whatever the point of pain is. And that's where a company is most desperate to figure out a solution. And there's probably the greatest possibility of finding some, some entryway into what's happening is to be able to find a solution for something that is bothering that company. But then it's, that's a big idea, but then you actually have to connect with that company and to the person who actually is supposed to take that responsibility of doing that. I mean, you can address these issues by being in finance, by being an academic, by being an accountant. I don't think, you don't have to start a business. It was like, we're very happy that people took a look at the structural finance of this industry and had to reformulate it. Again, like, I think if we had started right now, we could have gone to Lewis, or there are other places that we might have gone to for resources or money or things like that, rather than having to figure out exactly, to cater to industry's problems for 10 years before figuring out where we had a solution for them. So I think it's like respond to the pain.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the
Thank you,
insight and
Vanessa.
for the wonderful work that you do. And thank you all for coming. It was great to be here with all of you.